Hey y'all, I still get a lot of questions from viewers asking me where I get my designs and design ideas for my projects. Most of what you have seen on my channel in the past has been my own design, and I do that for copyright purposes. But in private life, I will purchase patterns, I will purchase models, and combine that with my own ideas to get my project completed. Well, in this video, I'd like to point you in a direction that maybe you haven't thought of going, maybe show you a source that you hadn't considered. And that is Scrollsaw Patterns. Scrollsaw Patterns can be fairly easy to convert for CNC purposes. Not all will work, but a good percentage will. When you're talking about Scrollsaw Patterns, there are several sources out there. But a good friend of mine for several years, by the name of Charles Deering, has been running a website called woodenvisions.com. And I have found that is an excellent place to start. Now, Charles has anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 patterns on his website. And if you take a look down here along this sidebar, you can see the different categories of patterns that he makes. He draws them all himself. He will do custom patterns, and he's a good guy to work with, and his prices are more than reasonable. And he's given me permission to show his site and to use one of his patterns in the creation of this video. So I would encourage you to head over to woodenvisions.com. And I'll put a link to his website down in the description box of this video. And check out what he has. To prepare for this video, I just kind of came over and started scrolling around on his website to see what he had available that would look good, to me anyway, for a video. And I went in here into the transportation section. As you can see, just in the transportation section, he has 120 different patterns. And I kind of scrolled through just looking around for something that might be of interest for this video. And I came across this helicopter pattern right here. And I thought that this would make a nice background piece to carve and put in the new shop shed. So I went ahead and I bought the pattern. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I converted that Scrollsaw pattern for use to VCarve on the CNC. So we'll go into a new session of Aspire. And before we start, let me say that even though I am doing this in Aspire version 10.5, this works identically in VCarve Desktop and VCarve Pro. So the first thing I need to do is create a new file. Now, I've already cut a piece of material for this V-carving. It's some birch plywood, and my width in X is 24.5 inches wide in X, 14 inches high in Y, and as I said, it is 1/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to set my Z0 to the material surface, and for layout purposes, I'm going to set my XY datum to the center. This will not have any 3D models in it, so I'm not concerned about the modeling resolution. I'll leave that on standard. And we'll get going. Now, the pattern I received from Charles was in GIF, whether you pronounce that GIF or GIF, format. So, with that being a bitmap, what I'll want to do is now import a bitmap. And navigate to the correct folder, and here is my bitmap image right here. So I'll double click that, and it imports into my work area. Now right off the bat we can see that this is fairly detailed, and it's going to be a nice looking design, but it's going to require us to do a bitmap trace and then possibly get in and do some node editing. But we'll find out when we get into it. So I'll come over here to Trace Bitmap with the bitmap selected, and we'll go into the Trace Bitmap form. Now I've selected black and white, and I'm leaving the color threshold alone, right in the center, because there are only two colors. Now, Charles does his patterns two different ways. Sometimes his patterns will be black and white, sometimes they will be gray and white. But either way, it's going to turn out the same way when we do a bitmap trace. We'll just play with our settings over here and preview often. So right off the bat, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and preview to see what these settings give me. And I'll scroll in a little bit to see what I get. Now I can see up in here I've got a little bit of noise. We've got some vectors here that follow the shape, and it's following the form okay, but I've got a little bit of noise here. I don't want to play with that when it comes time to do any cleanup work on this pattern. So I'll look down here at my noise filter, and I see it's set for 2 pixels. So let me jump this up to 4, and I'll preview it again. And that removed that little bit of noise there. Now let me look around. I've got another one here. I could probably jump up my noise filter a little bit more, but I also have some smaller detail that I do want to keep, so I don't want to raise that noise filter too high. I can come back and remove that one little piece there manually after I've done the tracing. And if we look, we see a little bit of noise up here outside of the vectors themselves, so we'll have that to clean up too. But I think that's going to suit my purposes just fine. Now it'll be totally up to you and how detailed you want to get. If you want to leave these little pieces of noise in here and go ahead and attempt to carve around it, that's your prerogative. I tend to remove things like that as I don't see it adding to the design. And let's not forget to keep the bigger picture in mind when we're looking at this. This is 24.5 inches wide and 14 inches tall, but that's not really big enough to see anything this small. The V-bit's going to come in and basically clear out all of this and avoid that little piece of noise. That'll probably go away in the carving. So I'm not going to concern myself with that little piece over here or the one up above. I'll remove those manually before I do anything else. So I think I'll go ahead and accept this. I'm not going to play with the corner fit, and I'm not going to concern myself with bitmap fading, because once I have this tracing, I've applied this, I'll shut off the bitmap and I won't be going back to it. So I'll go ahead and click Apply and save this bitmap tracing. Then I'll close that form, then immediately come up here and turn off the bitmap layer. So we have our tracing, and all in all, I think it looks pretty good. While I'm thinking about it and while it's in the front of my mind, let's go ahead and take care of those pieces of noise. And all I'm going to do is select it, delete it. And then there was one up here towards the top as well. I'll just select it and delete it. Now, for all intents and purposes, I'm ready to go ahead and V-carve this. The only thing I think I want to change is, this is the aircraft serial number. And as I said before, when I was stationed in Germany, in the U.S. Army, I was the crew chief on an OH-58 that was virtually identical to this one. There were a couple of subtle differences, but not enough to concern myself with. So I think I want to change this serial number to reflect the serial number of the aircraft that I was the crew chief on. So the serial number of the aircraft I worked on was 16847. So I want to change that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into my text tool, let my fonts load. Now, I have found a font called Gunplay that kind of mimics the military stencil that was used to paint this serial number up here on this front cowl. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. But if we look at this front cowl up here, this is a removable panel. And what you can't see really well is the fact that it runs along the side of the aircraft up here, and right about this area right in here, it turns a corner. This is the front of the aircraft, and this is the side. So if you'll notice, it looks like this 0 is kind of leaning the other direction. That's because perspective is making it appear that way. This 0 is starting to wrap around towards the front of the aircraft, and it's distorted this 0. And you'll notice these don't appear to be leaning forward as much, and the further back you go, the less they do lean. So I'm going to do this 0 separately. Then we'll go ahead and do this as a separate piece, and I'm going to distort this piece as well. So let's go ahead and start with the 0 and close that. My 0 is over here, and I'll bring it up. And now I want to try to size it and place it right over this 0 here. So I'll hold down Shift and scale it down. Then I want to rotate it slightly to try to get as close to this angle as I can. And now I'm going to spend some time resizing it and repositioning it. Okay, that's a little bit better. I might need to rotate it a little bit back this way. And that's a little closer to the pattern. That's a little bit better. Now, with that in place, I can go ahead and delete the original 0 that was a part of this pattern. And that'll work out just fine. Now, to avoid any problems later on, I'll go ahead and select it, right-click, and convert it to curves. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back into my text tool, and I'll type -16847, which was the serial number of the helicopter I worked on when I was stationed in Germany. And I'll select that text. And now I'm going to resize and position it. Now I'm going to get into my distort tool, and I'm going to distort this text. As we see the pink magenta number 1, the angle needs to be leaned forward, lean to the left. But back here, they don't need to be leaned quite so much. So, with my text selected, I'm going to go into my distort tool here. I'm going to use a bounding box. The selected vectors are valid. We'll apply. Now down here, I'm going to edit the envelope using these 4 points. So I'll take this and drag it this direction and just start leaning this text forward a little bit. I need to bring it up a little bit as well and kind of push that back somewhat. And this one needs to come down. And I'm going to pull this back a little bit. And that looks a little bit closer. It's not perfect yet. I'll be adjusting each of these characters individually. This is getting us in the general direction. So with this completed, my preliminary positioning, I'll go ahead and I'll bake this distortion. And we'll close it. Now if you'll notice, these are no longer text objects. All this text has now been converted to curves. So I can click off and I can edit each one of these characters separately. So I'm going to go ahead and start on this end here. And I'll zoom in. And I'll better position this number 7. And I'm going to shrink down the size a little bit so it better fits to take up the space occupied by this 9. And now I can go ahead and get rid of this 9. Select all the vectors and delete. And I'm going to carry on the same way for all of these characters. With that serial number taken care of, I can go ahead and move on to the next step. Now, I know that that is probably not something that anybody else is going to need to do. I just wanted it to reflect the serial number of the aircraft I personally worked on. The next step from here would be to select all of the vectors. And this is why we converted that one piece of text to curves. So I can come over here and I can use my curve fit tool. I'll go ahead and I'll click on this and we can see this is a very, very busy pattern with lots of points in it. And that's fine. It's going to be because it's a complex design. There are a lot of little details in here. Everything from rivets to vents and louvers in the battery and electronics door here, the chin bubbles and everything else. There are a lot of points, and there are going to be a lot of points. So I will go ahead and I want to change it to Bezier curves. And I'm going to leave my tolerance at 5 thousandths right now just to see what I get. And I'll go ahead and I'll preview it. And that did simplify the pattern quite a bit. Now I could go through here go into node editing and do a lot of cleanup work on this. But for this size of a project and for what it's going to be, I don't know that that would really be a benefit. There's going to be a lot of points just by the nature of the number of curves in this pattern, and I don't know that smoothing it out would really benefit the overall finished project. So I'm going to go ahead and just accept what I have right here, and we'll call that good. While I have all of my vectors selected, I'm going to go ahead and group them just to make it easier to select these vectors when it's time to go ahead and VCarve, which is actually what we're ready for now. So you can see how simple it actually was to download a Scrollsaw pattern, import that bitmap into the software, then come in, make any modifications we want to make, fit curves to these vectors. Now we'll go over and we'll create our V-Carve Toolpath. Something that I don't show often enough in my videos is when I do my design work and my layout, I set my X, Y datum position to the center of the material. When I go outside to cut on the machine, I set my XY datum to the bottom left corner of the material. Now is the time to make that change. So, I'll come up here under Material Setup to Set. Right here is where I'm going to make that change. I'll select the bottom left corner. You'll see my XY origin shifts over here to the bottom left corner. My vectors have not changed or moved a bit. And now I'm just going to double check to make sure everything is safe and appropriate for my machine. I'll click OK. Now my XY origin is over here. That's where my XY datum position is. So I'll select all my vectors and I'm going to calculate a V-Carve Toolpath. I find that for most projects, especially something that's going to be carving out big areas like these windows, a flat depth of 0.1 is about as deep as I want to go. In fact, this might be a little bit too deep, but we'll see when we preview it. The tools I'm going to use for something like this, I will go ahead and use my 90-degree V-bit. That is my go-to bit. I have the most success with that bit. And even though it's not a huge project, the 90-degree V-bit will carve deep enough to give me the detail I'm looking for. I'm going to use two clearance tools. Again, I've got some large areas to machine out here, so I'm going to use a 1/4-inch end mill for that. Now you notice I select my 1/4-inch end mill. This area here wakes up. I can set it to cut in an offset pattern, or I can set it to cut in a raster pattern. I'm going to leave it at offset. And the same thing with my 1/8 inch. You'll see my 1/8 inch. This is grayed out. It's going to take the same approach as this one here. So they're both going to cut in an offset strategy. So I'll come down here and we'll just call this V-Carve. My material is already cut to size, so I don't even need a profile toolpath. I'll just go ahead and calculate this toolpath. And I'll go through and I'm going to change my toolpath colors to black for some contrast so that you can see it better. And we'll start previewing toolpaths. Turn them off. Select my VCarve Clear 1 that uses the 1/4-inch end mill. We'll preview it. Then I'll select clearance number 2 that uses my 1/8 inch end mill, and we'll preview that. Now we'll do the final detail with the 90-degree V-bit, and everything falls right into place. We see now how easy it is to take a scroll saw pattern and use it for V-carving. This is a good way of getting complex design and complex artwork without spending a lot of time attempting to do it yourself. Now, that's not to discourage you from trying it yourself. Some of us are very, very good at creating our own designs. But others of us, like me, don't have an artistic bone in their body. So I do what I can, but I know my limitations. And in this case, the limitations are, I don't know that I would be able to do this myself. So I rely on guys like Charles to come up with the designs, and I'm happy to purchase them from him. If you followed me for any amount of time, you may have seen me post this photograph of Harley Quinn from the movie Suicide Squad. This is another one of Charles's scroll saw patterns that I carved for my oldest granddaughter, who is a major fan of this franchise. You can get a lot of excellent patterns online. And, as I said before, a good place to start is woodenvisions.com, and check out my buddy Charles Deering's work. He will do custom patterns. Just reach out, have a chat with him. You will not believe the detail in designing these patterns. I know that it's pretty basic of an idea, but it may have been a direction to look that you hadn't considered before. And hopefully you'll get some use out of the idea. So I hope you got something out of this video. And if you did, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up. As usual, this afternoon at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, I'll be hosting a live Q&A session right here on my YouTube channel, where we can discuss anything that I have demonstrated in this video. Again, that's today at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on my YouTube channel, and I've put a link to that live Q&A down in the description box of this video. Now, these live Q&A sessions are a great reason to go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. And when you click that red subscribe button, go ahead and click that little bell right next to it. Then click it a second time and set that menu to all notifications. Then you'll get a notification the next time I post a video and the next time I go live. So I hope to see you this afternoon for the live Q&A session. And as always, whether you subscribe to my channel or not, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch, and y'all take care.